The moment my son-in-law lowered his voice and said, "Please don't tell Delilah," I felt something inside me tighten. Not anger, not yet. Just the quiet, sinking realization that I had been placed somewhere I never wanted to stand, right in the middle of a secret. And secrets inside a family are never small things. They grow, they twist, and sometimes they break people apart. I remember the smell of coffee in my kitchen that afternoon. I had brewed it too strong, the way my late husband used to like it. The clock above the stove ticked louder than usual, each second landing like a small warning I didn't yet understand. Colton sat across from me at the kitchen table. My son-in-law, my daughter's husband. He kept rubbing his hands together the way people do when they're rehearsing a lie or trying to find courage for something they shouldn't be saying. Outside the window, the maple tree in my yard moved gently in the wind. Autumn had started early that year. Leaves were already turning gold, everything looked peaceful, but the air in my kitchen had grown heavy. "Mrs. Carter," he began, then stopped. I had told him many times to call me Margaret. He rarely did. There was always a careful distance in the way Colton spoke to me, respectful. Polite but guarded, the way a man behaves when he knows a mother can see more than she says. He cleared his throat. "There's something I need your help with." I folded my hands on the table. When you reach my age, you learn that certain sentences arrive like storms, quiet at first, then impossible to ignore. "What kind of help?" I asked gently. He looked toward the hallway even though we were alone in the house. Delilah was still at work. My daughter had always been the organized one. She managed a small accounting office across town and believed strongly in schedules, calendars, and planning every detail of life. Colton was the opposite, warm, easygoing, a little careless with time. Yet somehow, despite their differences, they had built a life that looked stable, or at least it had looked that way to me, until that afternoon. Colton leaned closer across the table. "I need you to promise something first," he said. That was the first moment my stomach tightened. Promises made before the truth is spoken are rarely fair. "I don't promise things I haven't heard yet," I replied quietly. For a second he looked almost relieved, then he exhaled slowly. I need someone to trust." I studied his face. Colton was 36, but in that moment he looked younger, nervous, almost boyish. His dark hair was slightly messy, like he had run his hands through it too many times on the drive over. I remembered the day Delilah introduced him to me. They had walked through my front door holding hands. Delilah's smile had been wide and bright. "Mom," she had said, "this is Colton." And the way he looked at her then, gentle, steady, had told me he loved my daughter deeply. A mother notices those things. It's instinct, but instincts also notice when something shifts. That afternoon, the man sitting across from me looked like someone carrying a weight he didn't know how to set down. "Talk to me," I said. He swallowed. Then the words came out quickly, like a door suddenly opening. "I've been hiding something from Delilah." The clock ticked again, slow, heavy. I felt my shoulders stiffen, but I kept my voice calm. "What kind of something?" Colton looked down at the table. "Nothing that hurts her," he said quickly. "At least, that's not my intention." That sentence alone told me it probably would. People rarely hide things that protect others. Usually they hide things that protect themselves. He continued. "I didn't know who else to talk to." "Why me?" I asked. He met my eyes then. "Because you're the only person who sees everything." I almost laughed at that. If he knew how many things mothers don't see until it's too late, he might have chosen someone else. Still, I waited. Finally, he said it. "I need to keep something from Delilah." Just for a little while, the words settled between us like dust. "What kind of secret requires her mother's silence?" I asked. He hesitated. And that hesitation was the moment I understood something serious was coming, because honest men don't pause that long. "I made a mistake," he said quietly. There it was, the beginning of many tragedies, not always the mistake itself, but the silence that follows. I felt my chest tighten. "What kind of mistake?" He rubbed his face slowly, then he leaned forward again, lowering his voice even further. "I invested money." I blinked. "That doesn't sound like a secret." "Not just any money," he said. The room seemed to grow smaller. "How much, Colton?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at the framed photo on my wall, Delilah and Colton on their wedding day. My daughter's arm looped through his, both of them smiling like people who believed the future was something solid. Finally, he spoke. "Most of our savings." The words landed heavily in the quiet kitchen. I inhaled slowly. "And Delilah does know?" He shook his head. "No, The clock ticked again. I thought about my daughter, careful, methodical Delilah, who balanced every dollar in a spreadsheet and still saved every receipt. And what happened to the investment? I asked. Colton's voice dropped to almost a whisper. It's gone. For a moment neither of us spoke. Outside, a car drove past the house. The distant sound faded quickly. Gone, I repeated. He nodded. A business opportunity with a friend. It looked solid. I thought I could grow the money quickly, surprised Delilah. I closed my eyes briefly. Surprises involving money rarely end well. And the friend? I asked. Colton's jaw tightened. He disappeared. Of course he did. That's the oldest ending to a bad investment story. Colton leaned forward urgently. I'm trying to fix it, I swear I am. I've been working extra hours. I'm applying for a loan if I can replace the money before Delilah notices. He stopped. The unfinished sentence said everything. Before she notices, before she finds out. Before the truth breaks something between them, he looked at me with quiet desperation. Please, he said, just give me some time. I felt the weight of his request settle over my shoulders. On one side was my daughter. On the other was the man she had chosen to build her life with. And suddenly I understood exactly where I was standing, right in the middle, between loyalty and honesty, between protection and truth. Colton's voice softened. I'm not asking you to lie, he said. Just don't tell her yet. I looked at the wedding photo again, then back at him. Colton, I said slowly, do you understand what you're asking me to carry? He nodded, but I wasn't sure he really did, because secrets inside families are rarely temporary, they grow roots. And something deep inside me was already whispering a quiet warning. This secret was only the beginning. After Colton left my house that afternoon, the silence lingered longer than usual. I didn't move from the kitchen table for several minutes. The coffee in my cup had gone cold, but I kept holding it anyway as if the warmth might return if I waited long enough. The maple leaves outside brushed softly against the window. Ordinary sounds, ordinary afternoon, but something had shifted. And once you notice a shift inside a family, it's impossible to pretend you didn't feel it. I stood slowly and rinsed my cup in the sink. The faucet ran a little too loudly in the quiet kitchen. Delilah would be home in an hour. My daughter had always kept a predictable schedule. Work until 5, stop at the grocery store if needed, home by 6, dinner by 6:30. Routine gave Delilah comfort. When she was a little girl, she used to line up her toys in perfect rows before she could fall asleep. Dolls on one side, books stacked neatly on the other. Even then, she liked knowing where everything belonged. And now Colton had placed something into her life that didn't belong anywhere. A secret. I dried my hands slowly and glanced again at the wedding photograph on the wall. Delilah looked radiant in that picture, not in the dramatic way some brides do, but in a quiet, steady happiness that comes from believing you chose the right person. I remembered that day clearly. The church had smelled faintly of lilies and polished wood. Colton had stood at the altar nervously adjusting his tie while guests whispered behind the pews. But when Delilah walked down the aisle, his entire face changed, softened, brightened, like someone who had suddenly been given something precious. I remember thinking then, this man will take care of her. It's strange how life rearranges those certainties. By the time Delilah arrived at my house that evening, I had managed to push most of my worry behind a calm expression. At least I thought I had. She stepped through the front door carrying 2 grocery bags and immediately frowned at me. Mom, are you okay? I forced a small smile. Of course. Why? She set the bags on the counter. You look like you've been thinking too much. I almost laughed. Delilah had always been able to read my face far too easily. I'm 71, I said. Thinking too much is part of the job description now. She smiled slightly and began unpacking the groceries. Tomatoes, bread, a small container of fresh basil. Delilah loved cooking. It was one of the quiet joys in her marriage with Colton. Every Sunday evening they invited friends or neighbors over for dinner. Nothing fancy, just simple meals and long conversations around their dining table. Sometimes Colton would play soft jazz music while Delilah finished preparing the food. They looked happy in those moments, and happiness, I've learned, often looks very convincing from the outside. You didn't have to bring groceries, I said. You skipped lunch again, didn't you? I had toast. Delilah gave me the look she had perfected sometime in her late 20s, the one that meant I know you're not telling the whole truth. You can't live on toast. I've been doing it for decades, I replied. She laughed softly and began slicing the tomatoes. The smell of basil filled the kitchen, ordinary evening. But every time I looked at her, Colton's words echoed quietly in my mind. Most of our savings, it's gone. Delilah had no idea, and I was suddenly the only other person carrying that knowledge. Colton's working late tonight, she said casually. That made me pause. He is. Yeah, some project deadline at the office. She didn't even look up when she said it, just kept slicing tomatoes carefully. I wondered if Colton had already begun working those extra hours he mentioned. Trying to repair the damage, trying to outrun the truth. Delilah placed the tomato slices onto a plate and drizzled olive oil over them. Mom, you should come over for dinner tomorrow, she said. Colton's making his famous lemon chicken. I smiled faintly. Colton did make a good lemon chicken. He had learned the recipe from his grandmother, and whenever he cooked it, the whole house smelled like garlic, lemon, and rosemary. It had become something of a tradition. You two spoil me, I said. That's the point. She turned to look at me then, her eyes warm. You spent 30 years taking care of everyone else. Now it's our turn. Those words landed heavier than she intended, because suddenly I wondered how long that hour would remain steady. Delilah continued talking while preparing the salad. She mentioned a coworker who had accidentally deleted an entire client file, a new bakery that had opened downtown, a book she wanted to recommend to me, normal conversation. But I noticed something small. When she mentioned Colton, her voice softened slightly. That quiet affection was still there, still intact. And that made the secret feel even heavier. After dinner, Delilah helped wash the dishes while I dried them. At one point she paused and leaned against the counter. Colton's been a little distracted lately, she said. My heart tightened immediately. Oh, nothing serious, just preoccupied. I kept drying the plate in my hands. Work stress maybe? Probably, she shrugged lightly. He's been staying up later than usual on his laptop. That would be the loan applications he mentioned, or perhaps something else. Secrets tend to grow additional secrets around them, Delilah continued. I asked him if everything was okay, and he said yes. I placed the plate carefully into the cabinet. And you believed him? She smiled slightly. Colton's terrible at lying. If something was really wrong, I'd know. I didn't answer. Because sometimes the people we trust the most are the ones we struggle hardest to see clearly. After Delilah left that evening, the house felt unusually quiet. I sat in my living room with the lamp on low and listened to the ticking clock. Colton's request repeated in my mind. Just give me some time, but time is rarely neutral. Sometimes it heals things, other times it allows problems to deepen. The next few days passed in a strange kind of watchful calm. I saw Colton and Delilah twice, once for Sunday dinner. Once when they stopped by briefly on their way to the grocery store. Colton behaved normally, too normally. He joked about the weather, complimented Delilah's cooking, even helped me fix the loose hinge on my kitchen cabinet. But every so often, when Delilah stepped into another room, his eyes met mine for a brief second. A silent question, "Are you still keeping the secret?" And each time I felt the same quiet unease, because I had agreed to nothing. Yet my silence was already becoming a kind of agreement. 3 nights later, something happened that made the situation far more complicated. It was nearly 10:30 when my phone rang. Delilah's name appeared on the screen. I answered immediately. "Hi, sweetheart." Her voice sounded strained. "Mom, have you talked to Colton today?" A small chill moved through me. "No," I said carefully. "Why?" There was a pause on the line, then she spoke again. "I just checked our bank account." The air in my living room suddenly felt very still, and I asked. Her next words came slowly. "Something's wrong. Something's wrong." Delilah's voice trembled slightly over the phone. It wasn't panic. Delilah rarely panicked. But I had known her long enough to recognize the tone she used when something didn't add up. The careful tone of a person checking numbers twice. I sat down slowly in the armchair near the lamp. "What do you mean?" I asked gently. "I was balancing our monthly expenses," she said. "You know, just updating the spreadsheet." Of course she was. Delilah had been balancing imaginary household budgets since she was 15. Even in high school, she kept notebooks filled with columns and totals. Organization gave her peace, and now that peace had been disturbed. "There's a transfer I don't recognize," she continued. My fingers tightened around the phone. "How big?" I asked. There was a pause. $20,000. For a moment the room seemed to tilt slightly. Colton had said most of their savings. Now the number had a shape, a weight. "And Colton didn't mention it?" I asked. "No," Delilah's voice was quiet. I thought maybe it was some automatic payment, but I checked the records. Another pause. It was transferred to a company account. I could hear papers rustling on her end. I've never seen the name before. My heart began beating faster. The secret Colton had tried to keep hidden was already surfacing, not fully, but enough to create questions. What's the company called? I asked carefully. Delilah read it aloud. It was unfamiliar to me, but Colton had mentioned a friend, a business opportunity, and a disappearance. Delilah sighed softly. Colton's still at work. I tried calling him, but it went straight to voicemail. That made something inside me tighten. Maybe he's just busy, I said. It sounded weak even to my own ears. Delilah didn't respond immediately. Then she said something that told me exactly how uneasy she had become. Mom, Colton always answers my calls. Yes, that was true. Their marriage wasn't perfect, no marriage is, but Colton had always been attentive in the small ways that matter, returning calls, sending quick texts. Remembering little details about Delilah's day, silence from him was unusual. I'm sure there's an explanation, I said softly. Delilah let out a quiet breath. I'm probably overreacting. But she didn't sound convinced. We talked a few minutes longer about small things, about nothing. Both of us circling around the same unanswered question. When the call ended, I sat in the dim light of the living room and stared at the dark window. The truth was beginning to press against the surface, not fully visible yet, but close, very close. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. The house was still dark when I made coffee. Sleep had come lightly. Too many thoughts had been moving through my mind. Colton's worried face at my kitchen table, Delilah's strained voice on the phone. The two pieces of the story were slowly moving toward each other, and I was standing in the middle. Around 8 o'clock, my phone rang again. This time it was Colton. I answered. Good morning, I said. His voice sounded tense. Mrs. Carter, did Delilah call you last night? So he already knew? Yes, I replied. He exhaled sharply. I was afraid of that. Colton, I said quietly. She found the transfer. I know. The words came out almost like a whisper. What did you tell her? He asked. I told her I didn't know anything. There was a long pause, then he spoke again. Thank you, but gratitude was the last thing I felt. Colton, I said firmly, your wife is worried. You need to explain what's going on. I will, he said quickly. Just not yet. The same request, more time. Colton, I'm fixing it, he interrupted. His voice carried that desperate determination I had heard before. I spoke with the bank this morning. I might be able to take out a personal loan. To replace the money, yes. And Delilah still wouldn't know. Another silence. Then he said quietly, that's the idea. I closed my eyes briefly. Secrets rarely stay buried simply because someone replaces the money. The betrayal remains. You're playing a dangerous game, I told him. I know. But his voice suggested he believed he could still control the outcome. You don't understand Delilah, I said softly. I do. No, I replied. You understand her routines, her habits, but you don't understand what trust means to her. He didn't respond, so I continued. She would forgive a mistake, Colton, but deception? My voice faded. He knew the rest. I just need a little time, he repeated. How much time? A few weeks. A few weeks, that felt like a lifetime in a marriage. Before I could answer, Colton said something unexpected. There's something else. My stomach tightened. What? I didn't invest all the money at once. A cold wave passed through me. What do you mean? I made 2 transfers. For a moment I couldn't speak. How much was the second one? His voice dropped. $15,000, $35,000 gone. Delilah hasn't seen that one yet, he said quickly. Of course she hadn't yet, but she will, I said. I know. He sounded exhausted. I just need to replace it before she checks again. I leaned back in my chair. This was worse than I thought, much worse. Colton, I said slowly, you didn't just make a mistake. I know, you buried yourself in it. He didn't argue, because he understood that already. Before we ended the call, he said one more thing. If Delilah asks you again, please don't tell her yet. I didn't promise, but I didn't refuse either, and that silence placed the burden back onto my shoulders. 2 days passed. Colton worked late every night. Delilah continued balancing numbers. The quiet tension between them slowly grew. You could feel it even in the smallest moments. A pause during dinner, a distracted glance, an unanswered question. Then, on Thursday evening, Delilah came to my house again. But this time she didn't bring groceries, she didn't even knock. She opened the door and stepped inside quickly. Her face was pale, and the moment I saw her, I knew something had changed. "What happened?" I asked. She held her phone out toward me. "The second transfer." My heart sank. "You found it?" "Yes." Her voice trembled now, not just confusion anymore, hurt. $35,000, Mom. I nodded slowly, Delilah's eyes filled with disbelief. I asked Colton about it, and her jaw tightened. He said it was a temporary business investment. I closed my eyes briefly, so he had begun telling part of the truth. But not all of it. Did he explain where the money went? I asked. Delilah shook her head. He said it's tied up right now. Another partial truth, but the most important detail remained hidden. The money wasn't tied up, it was gone. Delilah's voice softened. Mom, something feels wrong. The quiet honesty in her words made my chest ache. Colton wouldn't risk our savings without telling me. She looked at me carefully. You've always been good at reading people. Then she asked the question I had been dreading. Do you think he's hiding something? The room fell silent, because now the moment had arrived. The line between loyalty and honesty stood directly in front of me, and whatever I said next would change everything. Delilah stood in the middle of my living room, holding her phone like it contained the answer to a question neither of us wanted to ask out loud. Do you think he's hiding something? Her voice was quiet, careful. The way people speak when they're afraid the truth might break something fragile. I looked at her for a long moment before answering. Delilah had always believed that honesty was the backbone of every strong relationship. She said it often, almost like a personal rule she lived by. If people tell the truth early, problems stay small. I used to agree with her, but life has a way of complicating simple rules. I took a slow breath. Sit down, I said gently. She sat on the couch across from me. Her shoulders were tense, but she was trying very hard to stay composed. That was Delilah's way. She believed emotions should come after facts. First understand, then react. What exactly did Colton say? I asked. Delilah looked down at her phone again. He said the money was part of a short-term investment, a business opportunity with someone he knows. My chest tightened. That much was technically true, but truth when used carefully can sometimes disguise a lie. Did he explain the company? I asked. She shook her head. No. He said it's complicated. Complicated, that word appears in almost every story where someone is hiding something, Delilah continued. I asked him why he didn't talk to me about it first, and her lips pressed together. He said he wanted to surprise me. That was the same explanation he had given me, a surprise, a good intention wrapped around a very bad decision. Delilah looked up at me then. You know Colton, she said softly. Does that sound like something he'd do? I thought about the man who had sat at my kitchen table days earlier, rubbing his hands nervously. Colton wasn't reckless by nature, but he had always carried a quiet insecurity about money. Delilah earned slightly more than he did, not a lot. But enough that Colton sometimes joked about it in a way that wasn't entirely joking. I'm still trying to catch up to my wife, he would say with a smile. At the time it sounded playful. Now I wondered if there had been more behind those words. Colton does like surprising people, I said carefully. Delilah watched me closely. Mom, one word, but it carried the weight of 36 years of trust between us. You're not telling me something. My heart began to beat faster. There it was. The moment I had feared since Colton first asked for my silence. Delilah knew me too well. Mothers spend years studying their children, but children spend just as many years studying us. I'm not hiding anything, I said quietly. Technically that was true, I hadn't lied, I simply hadn't spoken. But Delilah still looked unconvinced. She leaned forward slightly. Did Colton talk to you? The question hung in the air. I felt the room grow very still. Colton's face flashed briefly in my mind. Please don't tell Delilah. Then Delilah's voice from the phone 2 nights earlier. Something's wrong. Both of them trusted me, but trust does not always travel in the same direction. Yes, I said finally. Delilah blinked. When? Earlier this week. Her expression shifted immediately, concern, confusion, and something deeper beginning to form. What did he say? I hesitated. Not because I wanted to protect Colton anymore, but because once the truth leaves your mouth, it cannot be called back. Colton told me he invested the money, I said slowly. Delilah's eyes widened slightly. He told you before he told me? Yes. The hurt on her face appeared almost instantly. It was subtle. Delilah wasn't someone who displayed emotions dramatically, but the change was unmistakable. He asked me not to say anything yet, I continued quietly. She leaned back against the couch. For several seconds she didn't speak, then she laughed softly. But it wasn't the warm laugh I was used to hearing. It was the kind people make when disappointment arrives quietly. So my husband confided in my mother, but not in me. I think he was trying to fix the problem first, I said gently. Delilah shook her head. That's not how marriage works. No, it was. She rubbed her temples slowly. Did he tell you where the investment went? Yes. Her eyes met mine again, and I hesitated only a moment. He trusted a friend with a business deal, and the word came sharper this time. The friend disappeared. The room went silent. Delilah's breathing slowed. Her mind was moving quickly now, assembling the pieces. How much did he lose? She asked quietly. Everything he invested. She closed her eyes. How much? I spoke the number carefully. $35,000. Delilah didn't move for several seconds. The information seemed to settle over her slowly. Then she exhaled. 35,000. Her voice sounded distant, like she was repeating a number from someone else's story. That was our savings for the house renovation. I know, that was 3 years of careful planning. I know. She looked down at the floor. For the first time since she arrived, her composure cracked slightly, just a small fracture. A shimmer of tears in her eyes, but Delilah quickly wiped them away. When did this happen? She asked. About a month ago. Her head lifted sharply. A month? Yes. And he's been acting like everything is normal this entire time. I nodded slowly. Delilah leaned forward again, elbows on her knees. For a moment she simply stared at the carpet, then she spoke in a quiet voice. You know what hurts the most? What? That he thought I couldn't handle the truth. Her voice trembled slightly now. I would have been upset, of course I would have, but we could have faced it together. I didn't answer because she was right. Delilah stood up slowly. I need to talk to him. Tonight, yes. Her voice carried a calm determination now. The kind that appears when someone decides they are ready to face something painful. Delilah, I said gently, try to stay calm. She nodded, I will. Then she looked back at me with a mixture of sadness and gratitude. Thank you for telling me. I wish the situation had been different. So do I. She walked toward the door, then paused. One more question. I waited. Did Colton think you would take his side? The question surprised me. I don't think he was asking for sides, I said carefully. I think he was asking for time. Delilah considered that, then she said something that would echo in my mind for many weeks afterward. Sometimes time only makes the betrayal bigger. She left shortly after that. And as the front door closed, I had the strange feeling that the quiet life our family had been living was about to change in ways none of us could stop. That night, around 11, my phone rang again. Delilah's name appeared on the screen. When I answered, I immediately heard something in her voice that made my heart sink. Not anger, not shouting, just a quiet, wounded calm. Mom, she said softly. Yes, I asked Colton if the money could be recovered. And her next words came slowly. He said maybe. A pause, then she added the sentence that confirmed everything had finally broken open. So I asked him to show me the investment documents. I held my breath. What did he say? Delilah's voice grew even quieter. He said there aren't any. When Delilah said, he said there aren't any, I felt the quiet weight of those words settle deep inside my chest. No documents, no contract, no proof, just a vanished friend and $35,000 that no longer existed. What happened next? I asked softly. There was a faint sound on the other end of the phone, the creak of a chair maybe, or Delilah sitting down after standing too long. For a minute, she said, neither of us spoke. I could picture the scene clearly, their kitchen. The soft yellow light over the table, Colton standing there realizing the story had reached its final wall. Delilah continued. I asked him again. I thought maybe he misunderstood the question. Her voice carried that same quiet steadiness she used when balancing complicated numbers. I said, Colton, where are the documents? And he looked at me like someone who had run out of places to hide. I closed my eyes briefly. Colton had known this moment was coming. Secrets always travel toward daylight eventually. What did he say? I asked. Delilah inhaled slowly. He said the investment wasn't formal. My stomach tightened. That's not good, I murmured. No, she replied softly. It's not. There was another pause, then she spoke again. He admitted that the friend who offered the business opportunity had asked for the money privately. My grip on the phone tightened. No paperwork, no agreement, just trust. And trust, when placed in the wrong hands, becomes the most fragile currency in the world. Delilah continued describing the conversation. I asked him who the friend was, and someone named Victor. The name meant nothing to me. Have you ever heard Colton mention him before? I asked. No, Delilah's voice carried a faint edge now. That was the first problem. She explained that Colton had met Victor through a casual business networking group, coffee meetings, informal conversations. Promises about a small startup company that was supposedly about to expand. It sounded convincing, Delilah said quietly. I could imagine how it had happened. Victor offering confidence, opportunity, quick returns, Colton wanting to prove he could build something bigger for his family. And one bad decision opening the door to another. What did Colton say about the money now? I asked. He said Victor stopped answering his calls 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks, that meant Colton had already known the truth before he ever came to my kitchen. Delilah, I began carefully, how did he seem when he told you this? Her answer came slowly. Terrified, not defensive, not angry, terrified. That detail mattered more than she realized. Fear usually means a person understands the damage they've caused. But fear doesn't erase consequences, Delilah added quietly. No, I agreed, it doesn't. On the other end of the line, I heard Delilah walking slowly across the room. I asked him why he didn't come to me immediately, she said, and he said he thought he could fix it first. The same explanation he had given me, Delilah exhaled. You know what I told him? What? I said fixing money isn't the same as fixing trust. For a moment neither of us spoke, then Delilah added something that surprised me. I didn't yell. That didn't surprise me at all. Delilah had never been someone who exploded with anger. When she was deeply hurt, she became calm, quiet, thoughtful. Sometimes that kind of calm was more powerful than shouting. What did Colton do? I asked. He apologized, and several times. Delilah's voice softened slightly. I believe he's sorry, but there was something unfinished in her tone. Believing someone is sorry, I said gently, doesn't mean you aren't still hurt. Yes, she stopped walking. I told him we needed to figure out what to do next. And what did he suggest? He said he wants to take out a personal loan to replace the savings. That was the plan he had mentioned to me. Did that make you feel better? I asked. Delilah thought about that for a moment. No, why? Because the money isn't the real issue anymore. Exactly, that was the part Colton had not fully understood. Money can sometimes be rebuilt. Trust is slower, much slower. I asked him something else, Delilah said. What? I asked if there were any other secrets. My breath caught slightly. What did he say? He said no. And do you believe him? Delilah didn't answer immediately. Finally she said, I want to. The way she spoke those 3 words made my heart ache. Wanting to believe someone is very different from actually believing them. What happens now? I asked quietly. Delilah sighed. We're going to the bank tomorrow. To talk about the loan? Yes, she paused. And then we're going to look for Victor. That caught my attention. You mean Colton's friend? Yes. Delilah's voice had grown firmer. If someone took $35,000 from my family, I want to know exactly who he is. That determination sounded familiar. Delilah had inherited it from my side of the family. When something felt unjust, she didn't run away from it. She investigated, calmly, methodically. You think you can find him? I asked. I don't know, but you're going to try? Yes. There was a quiet strength in her voice now. The kind that appears when pain begins transforming into action. Before we ended the call, Delilah said one more thing. Mom, yes, thank you for telling me the truth. I closed my eyes briefly. I'm sorry it had to come from me. No, she said softly. I'm glad it did. Why? Because at least I know someone in this situation chose honesty. After the call ended, I sat in the dark living room for a long time. Families are strange things. They are built slowly over years of small moments. Meals, birthdays, shared routines, and then sometimes one mistake can send quiet cracks through the whole structure. But cracks don't always mean collapse. Sometimes they reveal where the structure needs to be rebuilt. The next afternoon, Delilah called again. Her voice sounded different this time, not as fragile. But not fully steady either. We went to the bank, she said, and Colton qualified for the loan. That was good news, at least financially. But she continued, that's not the part you need to hear. My stomach tightened. What happened? Delilah took a slow breath. After the bank, I asked Colton to show me where he first met Victor, and he took me to a small office building downtown. What was there? Nothing. My chest tightened. The office was empty. Empty, yes. Delilah's voice turned colder. The company name on the door had already been removed. A quiet chill moved through me. How long ago? I asked. The receptionist downstairs said the tenant left 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks, right around the time Colton realized the money was gone, Delilah continued. And then she told me something else. What? That Colton wasn't the only person asking questions about Victor. That Colton wasn't the only person asking questions about Victor. Delilah's words hung quietly in the air between us. What do you mean? I asked. She said another man came looking for him 2 days earlier. My heart tightened. So Colton wasn't the only one who invested? That's what it sounds like. Delilah explained that the receptionist at the building had recognized Victor's name immediately, not because Victor had been famous, but because several people had already come asking for him. How many? I asked. She said at least 4 in the last week. 4, that meant Colton hadn't simply made a foolish decision, he had been caught in something larger, a small web of deception. What did Colton say when he heard that? I asked. Delilah was quiet for a moment. He looked like someone who finally realized how serious this was. Of course he did. Up until that point, Colton had probably been clinging to the fragile hope that Victor might still appear, that the money might somehow return, but hearing that other people were searching too, that would have shattered that illusion. What did you do next? I asked. We went to the police station. That surprised me slightly. Delilah was not someone who rushed toward dramatic actions. She preferred careful planning, but sometimes reality forces quicker decisions. Did they file a report? I asked. Yes. Her voice remained calm, but I could hear the exhaustion beneath it. They said cases like this happen more often than people think. I believed that. Financial deception thrives on optimism. People want to believe in opportunity. They want to believe in quick solutions. And sometimes that desire makes even careful people vulnerable. Delilah continued. The officer asked Colton a lot of questions. I imagine he did. Where he met Victor, how the investment was arranged, whether any contracts existed. And Colton had no paperwork. None. Another heavy silence passed between us. What happens now? I asked. The police will try to track him down, Delilah said, but they warned us that if Victor planned this carefully, he may already be gone. Out of the city, out of the state. Possibly even out of the country. These kinds of scams rarely stay in one place long, Delilah continued. They asked if we knew anyone else involved. Did Colton? No, but the officer had mentioned something interesting. The company name Victor used was registered only 2 months ago. I leaned back slowly, a temporary shell, a short-lived business identity created just long enough to gather money from a few hopeful investors. Then gone, Delilah sighed. Colton feels like an idiot. That was probably accurate, but shame alone doesn't repair damage. How are things between you two right now? I asked gently. She didn't answer right away. Finally she said, quiet. Quiet can mean many things in a marriage. Sometimes it means peace, other times it means distance. He keeps apologizing, she added. And how do you respond? I tell him we'll deal with it. Practical, but not emotional. Delilah had always processed pain slowly, like someone sorting through broken glass carefully, one piece at a time. The story might have remained private between them if not for what happened 3 days later. It was Sunday afternoon when Delilah and Colton came to my house. I could sense something different immediately, not tension, but a kind of tired clarity. They both looked worn, like people who had spent several sleepless nights thinking. I poured tea for all 3 of us and we sat at the kitchen table. For a while nobody spoke. Then Colton finally broke the silence. I told my parents. That surprised me. How did they take it? I asked. Colton gave a small, humorless smile. My father called me a fool. Honest fathers sometimes do that. And your mother? She cried. I nodded slowly. Family disappointment carries its own special kind of weight. Delilah reached over and placed her hand on the table near Colton's, not quite touching him, but close. We also told my brother, she added. And he said we should warn people. That made sense. If Victor had already taken money from several victims, others might still be at risk. Colton spoke again. The police said they're investigating, but it could take time. How long? I asked. They didn't say. Sometimes that means months, sometimes years, and sometimes the trail simply disappears. Colton rubbed his hands together again, the same nervous gesture he had made the first day he came to my kitchen. I should have talked to Delilah immediately, he said quietly. Yes, I replied. Delilah didn't contradict me, but she also didn't pile more blame onto him. She simply listened. Then Colton said something I hadn't expected. I told our friends too. Delilah nodded. At dinner last night. That caught my attention. You told everyone? Colton looked embarrassed. Yes, why? He hesitated, then he answered honestly. Because hiding it already caused enough damage. That was a hard lesson to learn, but an important one. Delilah spoke next. We also wanted people to know about Victor, so they don't fall into the same trap. Exactly. Sometimes the best way to recover from deception is to remove its power. Bring it into the open. Colton looked at me then. I'm sorry for putting you in the middle of this. His voice carried genuine regret. You shouldn't have had to keep my secret. I studied him for a moment. You asked me to, I said gently. Yes, and you know now why that was unfair. He nodded slowly. I do. Delilah finally reached over and placed her hand on his, this time fully, a quiet gesture but an important one. We're going to recover financially, she said calmly. The loan will replace the savings. And the rest, I asked. She looked at Colton. That part will take longer. Trust, once fractured, rarely repairs overnight, but something about the way they sat there together told me the marriage itself had not collapsed. It had simply been forced to confront a painful truth. Later that evening, after they left, I turned on the television for a little background noise while washing dishes. A local news segment was playing. Halfway through the broadcast, something caught my attention. The reporter mentioned a small financial fraud investigation happening in our city. Several victims. A man using temporary business registrations, promises of quick returns, and then a name appeared on the screen. Victor Salgado, the same name Colton had given the police. The story had become public, and suddenly Colton's mistake was no longer just a private family matter. When Victor's name appeared on the evening news, I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. Relief because Colton and Delilah were no longer alone in the story. Sadness because it confirmed how easily trust can be manipulated. The report lasted less than 2 minutes. But in those 2 minutes, the situation shifted from a private mistake to something much larger. The reporter explained that several people across the city had reported similar experiences. A man offering investment opportunities through informal meetings. A small company name that had only existed briefly. Money transferred quickly. Then silence. The police believed Victor had already left the state, possibly the country. When the segment ended, I turned off the television and stood quietly in my kitchen. The house felt unusually still. I thought about Colton. About the look on his face the first day he came to my table asking for silence. Back then, he had believed the problem was only about money. Now it had become something deeper. A lesson about trust, about pride, about the danger of trying to fix mistakes alone. The next few weeks moved slowly. Life didn't return to normal immediately, but it began adjusting itself. Colton followed through on the loan application. The bank approved it, though the monthly payments would stretch their budget for several years. Delilah told me about the conversation they had with the loan officer. He didn't judge Colton, she said one afternoon when we spoke on the phone. That must have helped. It did. She explained that the officer had seen similar situations before, smart people making hopeful decisions. Good intentions mixed with poor caution. Financial mistakes happen quietly in many families, they just rarely become public. Colton also started working additional hours, not obsessively, but steadily. He took on a few freelance consulting projects on weekends. Delilah supported the idea, though she made one condition very clear. No more secret plans. Colton had agreed immediately. That rule alone told me something important about the direction their marriage was taking. Not backward, forward, carefully, but forward. About a month after the news report, Delilah invited me over for dinner. It was the first evening that felt truly normal again. The house smelled like rosemary and lemon. Colton's famous chicken. Music played softly from the living room, the same quiet jazz he had always liked. And Delilah was standing at the stove, stirring vegetables with the same relaxed rhythm she had before all this began. The routine felt comforting, familiar. When Colton came into the kitchen carrying 3 glasses of iced tea, he looked tired but calmer than I had seen him in weeks. Dinner's almost ready, Delilah said. He smiled faintly. Smells good. We sat down together a few minutes later. For a while the conversation stayed light. Work, books, a neighbor's new dog that barked far too much. Then Colton set his fork down. I talked to the detective again today. Delilah looked up. Any news? Colton shook his head. No sign of Victor yet. That wasn't surprising. People who design scams usually plan their exit carefully. But they did say something interesting, Colton added. What? Delilah asked. They've identified 7 victims so far. 7. The number felt heavy. Are they hopeful about recovering any money? I asked. Colton gave a small shrug. The detective said sometimes funds appear later if the person gets caught. But not always. No, Delilah nodded slowly. Then she reached across the table and placed her hand over Colton's again. Whatever happens, she said calmly, we'll manage. Her voice carried quiet strength. Colton looked at her for a moment, then lowered his eyes. I'm still sorry, he said. Delilah squeezed his hand gently. I know. There was no anger in the room, just the calm recognition that mistakes had consequences, but also that people can choose how they move forward afterward. Later that evening, after dinner, Colton and I ended up alone in the kitchen while Delilah stepped outside to answer a phone call. He leaned against the counter and spoke quietly. I don't think I've ever been this embarrassed in my life. Embarrassment often follows pride. I imagine it's been difficult, I said. He nodded. Delilah deserved better from me. Yes, I replied honestly, but you're facing the situation now. He looked down at his hands. I thought I could fix everything before she found out. That's a common mistake, I said gently, trying to repair something alone. He sighed. My father told me something the other day. What? He said real strength isn't avoiding mistakes. It's admitting them quickly. That sounded like wise advice. Colton continued. I wish I had done that. I studied him carefully. People sometimes change after painful experiences, not dramatically, but quietly, like a small adjustment in the way they carry themselves. And Colton looked like a man who had learned something he wouldn't forget. When Delilah came back inside a few minutes later, the mood shifted again to something lighter. We talked about future plans. A small trip they wanted to take next spring, home repairs that could wait another year. Simple things, but those simple things are often what rebuild stability after a storm. Before I left that night, Delilah walked me to the front door. Mom, she said softly. Yes, do you ever wonder how families survive things like this? I smiled faintly. Yes, and I thought about it for a moment. I think they survive by choosing honesty earlier the next time. Delilah nodded slowly. That makes sense. She hugged me then, and the hug felt steady, not fragile, not uncertain, just steady. As I drove home that night, I realized something important. The secret that once threatened to divide us had done something unexpected. It had forced everyone involved to confront difficult truths. And sometimes those truths become the foundation for something stronger. Several months passed after that evening. Life, as it often does, slowly found its rhythm again. Not the exact rhythm it had before, because once something breaks, even if it's repaired, it never returns to the precise shape it once held. But it became something steady, something honest, and sometimes that is even stronger. Winter arrived quietly that year. The maple tree outside my kitchen window lost its last leaves sometime in early December. The branches looked bare and delicate against the pale sky, like thin lines drawn across cold glass. I spent more afternoons at home reading or baking small things Delilah liked: cinnamon bread, apple cake, the sort of simple recipes that make a house feel warm. Colton and Delilah visited often, not out of obligation, but because the three of us had grown strangely closer through everything that happened. When families survive a difficult moment, there's a kind of quiet understanding that forms afterward. Less pretending, less politeness, more truth. One Saturday morning in January, Delilah called me earlier than usual. Mom, she said, her voice carrying a hint of excitement. Yes, you won't believe this. I set my coffee down. What happened? The detective called. For a moment my heart skipped. They found Victor, yes. The news felt almost unreal. Where? Arizona. Delilah explained that Victor had been stopped during a routine traffic check. His car registration raised a flag connected to several open fraud investigations in different states. Apparently Colton and the other victims hadn't been the only ones. Victor had repeated the same scheme in several cities over the past 2 years. Small fake companies, temporary offices, promises of quick business returns, then disappearance. What happens now? I asked. They're bringing him back here to face charges. Delilah's voice was calm, but I could hear relief beneath it. Not because the money would necessarily return, but because the uncertainty was ending. For months, Victor had been an invisible ghost in their story. Now he was simply a man who had to answer for what he had done. Colton's already talking with the detective, Delilah added. Does this mean you might recover the money? I asked. Maybe some of it, she said. The detective said there were accounts connected to the case. Even partial recovery would help. But somehow I sensed the money was no longer the most important part. A few days later, Colton called me himself. His voice sounded lighter than I had heard in months. I wanted you to hear it from me too, he said. I'm glad they caught him. Me too. There was a pause, then he added something thoughtful. You know what the strange part is? What? When the detective told me Victor had been arrested, I didn't feel angry. No, what did you feel? Colton thought for a moment before answering. Grateful, that surprised me. Grateful for what? For the lesson. I leaned back slightly. That's a rare response. I know, he laughed quietly, but if this hadn't happened, I might have continued believing I needed to solve every problem alone. That was the heart of the mistake, not just the investment, the secrecy, the pride. Colton continued. Delilah told me something a few weeks ago that I keep thinking about. What did she say? She said trust doesn't mean never making mistakes. What does it mean then? It means not hiding them. Wise words, very wise. Spring arrived slowly after that. The maple tree outside my window began growing new leaves again, small green ones at first, delicate, but determined. One evening in early April, Delilah and Colton invited me over again for dinner. This time the atmosphere felt different, not cautious, not fragile, just peaceful. The loan payments had begun, but Colton's extra projects were helping, and the detective had confirmed that some of Victor's seized accounts contained money from the fraud cases. No one knew yet how much would eventually be returned. But there was hope, and sometimes hope is enough. During dinner, Delilah told me something that made me smile. Colton double-checks every financial decision with me now. Colton laughed. Sometimes 3 times. That's probably healthy, I said. After we finished eating, we sat in the living room with cups of tea. The evening light filtered softly through the windows. Quiet, comfortable, Delilah leaned back in her chair and looked at Colton. You know, she said, this whole mess taught me something too. What? He asked. That forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting. Colton nodded slowly. I know, but it is choosing to keep building. She reached over and squeezed his hand, and I think we're doing that. Colton looked at her with that same gentle expression I had noticed years earlier on their wedding day. A little older now, a little wiser, but still there. Later that night, as I prepared to leave, Colton walked me to the door. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For not abandoning me when I made a terrible decision. I studied him for a moment. You made a mistake, I said, but you faced it. That doesn't always happen. He nodded slowly. I'll never forget it. I believed him. And as I drove home that evening, I realized something important about the whole story. The secret Colton once asked me to keep had felt dangerous because secrets isolate people. They place walls between those who should be standing together. But once the truth finally came into the open, those walls disappeared, and the family that remained afterward was stronger for it. Not perfect, but real. Sometimes I still sit at my kitchen table in the quiet afternoon and think about that first moment Colton asked me to stay silent. About the way secrets can place us in difficult positions. About how easy it is to believe we're protecting someone by hiding the truth. But families are not protected by silence. They are protected by honesty, even when honesty is uncomfortable, even when it arrives later than it should. So I want to ask you something. If you were standing where I stood that day between your child and their spouse, holding a secret that could change everything, what would you have done? Would you have kept the silence? Or would you have chosen the truth? Tell me in the comments. And if this story reminded you how important honesty is inside a family, don't forget to subscribe and share your thoughts. Because sometimes the most powerful lessons come from the mistakes we survive together.